So today I'm going to be talking about design as an element in itself, which is very interesting. It's kind of applying something very scientific to something which is so inherently emotional. And it's kind of funny to look at it through that loop. So I'm going to take you on a little journey there. Sorry about that. Thank you. There we go. So, design, the element. It's something that's really all around us. It's in everything. It has all those very interesting manifestations. In any civilized place you are, wherever you go, design is always somewhere. Everything is designed. Even the chairs you're sitting on, even in a place like Australia, everything is designed. It's really quite unique. Wherever you go, you will find it. And see, these manifestations are really fascinating. It sort of crystallizes in all these different ways. You know, all the things you love most have these really beautiful different ways in which it manifests itself. It can be big, it can be small, it can be huge, it can be defined as art, it can be defined as something else, but really this purposeful thing called design, it finds itself into everything, and you'll find that all the things you really love, it's usually completely full of it, and it's very, very interesting. And, you know, it can be small, it can be big, it can be completely imaginary things like software, it can be very physical things, but we're, of course, mostly focusing on the software side of things here, because that's what we do. Now, it also has this very interesting quality where it decays. It's not decaying as in most elements are, where it sort of leaves its mark on other things, but something which was once fantastic in terms of design can then suddenly decay to look really garish and weird later. It's really funny. It sort of looks out of place. And then the other way it happens too. It doesn't just decay by sort of losing value. It also really doesn't like when you like stuff on top of it, and then it just sort of like falls apart. It's like you have a really good design, and then stuff starts adding onto it, and it just sort of all its qualities sort of vanish. But it's really fun to research this element because it's so, you know, it's so peculiar and has all these like really weird qualities about it. And to research it well, you sort of have to take it apart. And that's what I did. You know, I was this kid when I was very young. I'm still a kid. I mean, who am I kidding here? But when I was much younger, I went to the art academy and I was making all these really stupid digital art things on my Windows computer. But I was going to the art school and was going to get serious, so I got all my money together and I got a MacBook. It was the first MacBook. It totally melted too, by the way. It was like, oh, first generation MacBook, and then like 3 months later it was completely dead. But anyway, that's beside the point. It really completely fascinated me because, you know, coming from Windows and Linux, I was pretty fascinated by this new OS. And what I used to do was, you know, I sort of made my Linux computer look really cool with all these weird skins and stuff and tried designing around that. And when I got my Mac, I really didn't feel the need to customize it anymore. In fact, I found myself mesmerized by stupid things like dragging files around. And I was like, this is stupid. Why am I enjoying this? Why is it fun for me to drag files around? And why are these icons so appealing to me when they look so neutral and normal? And I started getting really fascinated by that. Like all these things that I shouldn't be getting excited about, I was getting excited about. And it just blew my mind. So my first instinct was to just take it apart. It's like, why does that happen? And why am I getting so offended when something doesn't quite fit into that whole thing? So that's when I started doing that. I started recreating the icons. You know, when there was an app for like converting movies or something, I designed a different icon for it that looked sort of in place. And that's sort of how I, you know, got into that design, tried to figure it out. And I found that if I kept an open mind about that throughout, you know, my whole career, I stayed curious and I stayed open-minded about it. I sort of figured that out. I researched stuff by opening my mind and sort of delving into it. And because it was so fascinating to me to, sorry, I have to just go back a little bit here. It was so interesting to me to, the wrong slide. It was so interesting to me to see these responses from me that I just had to take it apart, and that's how I got into design in the first place. And it's something I still do. I still make really stupid like redesigns of stuff. You know, when I see an app that I don't quite like, I try and make it fit in with other things, and I keep an open mind about it. Anyway, qualities. When you go about design and you take it apart, you'll find that if you start taking it apart, you'll find some key qualities to really great design. And the best design you'll find has several main qualities to itself. Great design has constraints, it has inherent constraints. One of the good examples of this was when I was a kid, I played this game called SimCity. And in SimCity, there was it's a very complicated game. It also has this very Photoshop-like interface, by the way. I think that maybe how I sort of got into Photoshop in the first place, because this doesn't really look like a game. It's something where it's more like, you have to really figure out these little palettes and stuff like that, and I think that may have really made me fascinated by it. Anyway, I usually just didn't play it, but I let my sister play it, because when she played it, she took weeks to build really beautiful, like elaborate cities, something which I just didn't have the patience for. And it really took a lot of effort to make cities like that. You have to make like residential zones, you had to make industrial zones, commercial zones, you had to make sure there was power for everything, water plants, police stations, fire stations, all the kind of stuff I was just too impatient for. But then one day I found cheat codes for it. And I gave my sister the cheat codes. And when you had the cheat codes, you could just build anything you want. So what she did, she built the most garish, incredibly ugly city full of these bizarre buildings and stuff, and she would just skip this whole process, all the constraints that forced her to make something so elaborate and beautiful, and completely sort of ruin that. And those constraints helped her make something really amazing. In a similar way, you can work really hard as an engineer to take away all the constraints, but a really good design tries to fit into those constraints and gracefully extends itself when the constraints sort of free up. And you'll find that if you take like really good design apart, that usually it doesn't try and fight its constraints, it pushes them, but it really elegantly fits into them. Which brings me to the next point. Good design is a system. It's not just like one little layer of veneer. Good design can be a system in many different ways. It can be as simple as having a color palette, or having a consistent, let's say a bunch of icons in a Mac, for instance. They have a consistent angle, so you can see that it's a consistent whole. It just belongs together as a family. And consistency is really a really good thing, because if something's not consistent, it kind of makes us really uncomfortable. And it's not really an obsessive-compulsive thing. We just like seeing consistency. And that's just sort of the way it is. So if you have a system, you'll be able to extend that and create a design that is really friendly to new stuff as well. So let's say you have to create something like a certain aesthetic. Once you define the aesthetic, it should gracefully scale with that. If you add new things to it, you can build new things into it, and it will just work. Good design is often original. Now it's a bit of a controversial point, because yes, design is often obvious, and it's not, you shouldn't force yourself to do something completely new or original or whatever. But there's a really good example about not an example per se, but a story about originality that I really appreciate. Usually when I'm designing something, I try and hit what's called the originality threshold. Now, let's say someone told you to draw a picture of a bear, or a visualization of a bear, and you draw a picture of a bear, and then they ask you to make another one. You have to draw a completely different picture of a bear, not drawing on the first one. It has to be a different way of visualizing or representing a bear. You do this once or twice or 3 times, and it's fine. You can draw bears all you like. And at some point, you start hitting this point where you're like, God, I have no idea how to visualize a bear at this point. I've drawn every possible way of representing a bear. That is the originality threshold. You start to really have to think and find out a completely new way, something you've never seen before, something that's it's somewhere in your head. You can sort of sense that it's there, but it takes a lot of effort to get there. And sometimes you don't even need to push yourself over that threshold, but it's good to exhaust the options to see what is exactly in your mind, and if you can push yourself to more originality. And trust me, the bear is in there somewhere. It just will show up at some point. And last but not least, good design is a challenge. I mean, if it's easy, and if you're like, oh, this is all just going swimmingly, you're probably doing it wrong. There's also a lot of pitfalls, of course. There's an interesting thing about making a design system where you're like, I can frame all my design decisions into the system because I've got all these colors, or, you make all these icons in this angle. Apple made a really good choice of making all icons in iOS rounded rectangles, for instance. It's easy to make icons around rectangles. That's great. I had a client once that had an image editor. Now, an image editor has lots of icons. It's like that, in that screenshot of SimCity I just showed with all the different icons and stuff. It's kind of like that, but this particular image editor had a name, and the name was a bird. So what the developer wanted was everything should be bird-themed. Now, that's nice and all that, But if a user wants to use a paintbrush or is looking for a paint bucket or something, and the paintbrush is a feather and the paint bucket is like a cracked egg with like paint spilling out of it, it kind of may confuse the user as to what those tools really are. And so there is such a thing as taking a system too far. You can really frame it in such a way that it becomes no longer a framework, but it's some sort of like horrendous edifice that nothing can be framed into anymore. And that's a little bit of a difficulty. By the way, I couldn't argue with the developer that it may have been a bad idea to do something like that, so I did draw those icons, and eventually he saw his mistake. Never used the normal icons though, sadly. And the other, challenge is facing over design, because it's really tempting to, you have to make an icon for an app, you want to stand out. Why not apply a ton of design to it? And by design, I mean layers of paint, You can sort of paint it up and make it up in such a way that it looks like a crazy illustration, like a hyper-detailed camera icon for your camera app. May be really nice and make it sort of stand out. But again, a good design is often simple. It should be, if you want to stand out, why not try for originality instead of more layers of paint? And designers may be like, why would you not light all these crazy, design things on it? Well, you can design everything super intensely, but it's just way nicer if you just sort of kind of fit in. There's some beauty about being original and simple at the same time. And, a lot of designers, when they make something that's so over-designed, it's sort of a crutch for, trying to go through originality. And what they essentially present to you may not be the bear you're looking for, it's just a bear with a bunch of other stuff added to it. So that's great and all, but observing design is fun, but at some point you have to actually dive into it and handle design yourself. And a lot of people sort of approach design as if it should be some sort of, especially in the Apple community. I mean, obviously Apple puts design on a large pedestal and uses it as a decision-making process, but if you're working on design yourself and you're developing an app as well, I would suggest considering design to be more of your problem solver. So you have design not being a fat emperor on a throne, it's something you work with and it helps you solve your problem. It's something that cannot be rushed, just like engineering, and you should always keep in mind that it's simply something which should be easy and simple. If you keep design within a simple framework, as I mentioned, like as a system, it's extendable and it allows you to add to it. And while it's very, very easy and very, very fun to do all design yourself, I myself cannot develop, and there's a lot of developers that cannot design. So there's a few words to be said about working with actual external designers. And working with external designers can be really fun, but it can also be, well, less than fun. Having worked with developers for a long time, I understand how difficult it must be to actually find a designer you want to hire. Because, I mean, this is a big risk you're taking. If your money's on the line, your app is on the line, you want to make the right choice in getting someone that actually design your app. And so where do you begin? Where are you going to find a designer that can design your app, your baby? How do you do that? Well, so there's several websites, and websites like Dribbble, for instance, where people show off all their visual talent. And what you do there is you just find someone who makes like really cool stuff and does all these like really complex, beautifully, intrinsically detailed designs. And if he gets tons of likes and lots of comments, that's probably the guy you should hire. No, it's actually not true. That's not what you're looking for at all. Well, yes, I know this guy makes like really cool stuff, but just center yourself for 1 second and try listening to me. So yeah, okay, I know he makes like really cool stuff, but why don't you just send an email to a couple of people and propose like, this is my app and it's really cool and it's really nice, but I need some design work done for it. And how do you propose going about this? What kind of email does he send back? How soon does he send the email back? Do you guys have a phone call? I mean, how do these conversations go? If you have a good communication from the onset, it's probably going to be a good process communicating together, because communication is a huge thing if you're working with a designer, and that may be one of the things you want to get down first. And then you can see someone's work on his website, and if he makes really shiny buttons and stuff, that's really cool. But does he make systems? I mean, does he is he able to deliver like a whole app as a whole, or is it more something that is an isolated thing? You want to really focus on seeing qualities that the designer has where you can deliver something that is a whole app in itself. One screen is really cool, but if you can, download an app that you worked on, you can see, is there like a good usability to it? Is it a good flow? Does it all really rhyme together? Because honestly, I was really good at some point in making really shiny little parts of stuff, but I hadn't really mastered or come to terms with creating something that worked as a consistent whole. And that's something you really want. You should look for that. And third and last is you should hire someone hungry. There's a lot of really established, very famous designers out there, and they're really cool, and they're really nifty, and they're really expensive. And perhaps if you work with them, you can get massive publicity because they'll put their work, their fantastic new app on their website, and it's going to be great. But what you have to realize is these guys make a lot of apps and make a lot of designs, and they don't put all of them on their website at all. And there's a lot of designers out there that were just starting out, like me and Jeff. And at some point, we needed to have our first jobs, and someone took that risk. They took the plunge. They hired us. It turned out great, and we were hungry. We were cheap, hungry, hardworking, willing to prove ourselves, and it's great to hire someone. Whenever you hire a designer, whether it be a super established designer or someone just starting out, it will be a risk. You will take and calculate a risk either way. And of course, you'll be using a contract, right? Because, come on. You're both going to get screwed if you don't. And if you can communicate with a new designer and he's going to think it's weird if you use a contract or something, there you go. You just walk out of that. Anyway, yay, you found a designer. That's great. That's great news. Now everything is going to be great. You guys are going on a honeymoon. It's going to be fantastic. The designer knows exactly what you want to do. Your app is going to be beautiful. Designers just know what they're doing. But here's a small secret. We actually don't. We don't really know what we're doing. It depends really on what we get. If you guys describe your problem really well and you come forward with a good set of, a good idea of what the app does, what you want it to do, what you want the design to be, it's going to be really great because we can actually solve a problem, and a well-defined problem is solvable by design. So if you get that down, that's really good. It's one of the first things you have to do. And again, that first communication was a good indication of how they respond to your emails. You want to make sure that you can both put exactly into words what your thoughts are about things. And then there's a whole feedback phase. Once we get started, you have to actually go back and forth and talk about stuff. And it's really, really important that you actually speak out at this point. Because the worst thing that can happen is that you sort of bite your tongue at some point and you don't say anything. It's really, really refreshing to just sometimes take a deep breath and say, that sucks. It's okay, do it. You can take a deep breath and say, that sucks. Go ahead. That sucks. It's great. Oh, it's so refreshing. And so if you do that, at least, you'll get a feedback from the designer. You'll be like, you can tell them, wait, what you sent, that sucks. And they're like, well, what do you mean that sucks? That's not a very nice thing to say. And they're like, well, I guess I can nuance that. I'm like, yeah, your way of giving me feedback sucks. And they're like, well, okay, well, I just don't appreciate you making the hot pink. It was kind of an app for men, and that way you can sort of get a ball rolling. You'll start communicating, you start talking, that way it works. What can also happen is you say, that sucks, and you'll say, no, you suck, your face is stupid, and this guy's making it personal, and you probably shouldn't be working with him. But that's why you have a contract, right? Anyway, you have a conversation going, that is great. Sparks fly, magic happens. And that is sort of the way design process really, really shines. Once you have that happening, it's all great. However, most people would end it there, but I would add one minor thing. Once you design something, there's going to be reactions. People are going to actually talk to you about your design. Even worse, you'll get App Store reviews about it. And trust me, coming from a place where I've delivered a lot of apps that were actually, subject to pretty intense scrutiny, you can, deal with critique privately really well, but then suddenly when all sorts of people, anonymous, random people start telling you that your stuff sucks, it's really hard. I worked on this little app once, and people started talking about it on the internet, and it was just all these random people that are saying all these things, and then you suddenly find it's very, very hard to deal with all these random bits of feedback. But hey, you have to keep in mind, you're working with a very caustic element here. This is an element that provokes, it offends, and that's great. It should. You keep people talking, you stay on your toes, and you have to keep in mind it's a subjective thing. Perhaps, the designer really did like pink. That's great. You did it. You got that ball rolling. As long as you keep handling design in an optimistic way, it's going to be great. Thank you.